Thank you all very much. It's good to be here. I am thrilled, especially after how long I went last week, that y'all came back. That's a good sign. Either that or y'all really just don't have a whole lot to do on Wednesday nights at Cleveland. Right? Anyway, good that y'all are here tonight. We talked about depression and anxiety last week. Talked about how it may affect somewhere around 20 to 25% of our junior high school population. That tonight's topic, I think, will either impact you directly or indirectly, pretty much 100% of us, and that's dealing with anger. Anger is an interesting topic to talk about. I thought I'd start off at least with a light story. Hopefully it's a funny story, but at least a lighter story. I had a client, I had someone call me on the phone to arrange anger management training or anger management sessions, and these were going to be court mandated. Usually when I work just with people that are interested in some self-improvement, we go through an anger management course, just kind of at their speed, whatever they think is helpful for them. If it's court mandated, then we focus on about an 8-hour minimum for their class. And it's kind of different format because when it's someone that comes on their own, they're looking for self-improvement, they're there voluntarily. And so counseling is looked at as some type of assistance. When they're court mandated, counseling is looked at as some type of punishment. So it's usually a different atmosphere, a different kind of perspective as they come in. They came in, we made an appointment, told them, gave them the address, and so if you're familiar with my office, you access it through the back side of the building. All of us know where the big parking lot is. Most of us know that you get to more things on this parking lot than you do on the other, but not everybody in the community knows that. So here's this client rattling the doors of a building that nobody is occupying, and she gets on the phone, and I'm finishing up a client, so I don't answer the first 2 times she calls, and by the 3rd time I pick it up and she's like, "Where are you? I'm supposed to be here for anger management classes." I'm like, "Okay, all right, you failed the pretest. I can see we have some work to do." So let me ask you a question. Is anger good or bad? I'm going to poll the audience. Thumbs up for good, thumbs down for bad. What do we vote? How are we doing? Ooh, wow. What does this mean? Oh, wow. I have got a very exceptional crowd. You are right. Those of you that answered this way, it can be good or bad. How could anger possibly be good? Well, we'll take a look and see. I know David was quick to jump in there and answer that for me, but I guess it was rhetorical. I'll clue you in next time, David, when I ask a rhetorical question. One of the things that we see in the Bible really early about anger is a command that says, "In your anger, do not sin." Now, it doesn't say, "Do not anger," or "you sin by anger," right? It says, "In your anger, do not sin." We talked before when we were talking about depression and anxiety, that feelings are not good or bad, they're just feelings. And feelings are not facts. Anger is a feeling. It's not good or bad. In fact, there's this time when Jesus was going into the temple, and it was close to one of the holidays, and people would be traveling from different areas, and they were there to make some type of a sacrifice. Well, traveling can be kind of inconvenient anyway, and there's always a struggle for how much luggage you can carry. So someone that was supposed to be carrying a lamb, well, that'd be kind of heavy luggage to go, right? And you're going at the pace of the lamb, so that might not be very convenient. So what they had arranged there is that you could go to the temple and buy your lamb there and offer it for a sacrifice, or it could be a pigeon, or it could be a bull, whatever. But then there was another trick there. If you wanted to buy one of these animals at the temple, you had to exchange your money for temple money. Yeah, and the exchange rate wasn't very good. It benefited those that were trading and exchanging the money. So you may come in there wanting to worship, and in your efforts to worship, you wind up getting ripped off. And that was kind of the culture that was going on. When Jesus walked in there, and saw what was going on, what do you think his emotion was? Yeah, what did he wind up doing there? That's right, he flipped some tables over, he ran the merchants off that had the animals and everything. But before he did that, what did he do? Y'all can peek on the screen there. David, what did he do?
He was talking about how it's supposed to be a place of worship, but you turn it into a den of thieves.
Okay, yeah, he had a lesson to give him, to preach to him. But Olivia, what act did he perform before flipping the table? So
He made a whip.
he made a whip. Is a whip something you can just whip out like that? Whip out. Okay, it takes some time, right? It takes some concentration. It takes a little bit of focus. So we see that he was angry. We also see that he took a little time between getting angry and acting. Take some time to at least braid this whip. Now, do we see a report where he whipped people? No, he probably made some noise, probably got their attention. But we see, I remember when I was your age, the preachers would use this term, righteous indignation. Well, Jesus had righteous indignation in there. I think they might have been a little bit nervous to say Jesus was angry, assuming that anger is bad, which is neither good or bad, like y'all help me describe, but is something that can be, has potential for either. Okay, so when we look at anger, what we see is anger is essentially energy. It can be a positive energy, it can be a negative energy. Another true story from my file of stories. One Saturday afternoon, I was walking in the garage to retrieve something. I was barefooted, probably wearing pajamas or something, and stepped barefoot on my claw hammer. Now, right away, the first thing I felt was pain. The next thing, when I realized what had taken place, was anger. First thing that came to my mind was, I'm going to pick this up, I'm going to sling it across the garage, and bust out, whatever happens, break some sheetrock or something like that. But before I acted, I remembered the guy that's in charge of fixing broken things is me. And so rather than creating an extra project for that Saturday, I put the hammer up and took the opportunity of cleaning the rest of the garage because I was the one that left the hammer there in the first place. So my energy could have been directed towards something negative. It could have been directed towards something positive. So when we look at anger management, if you were coming to my 8-hour class, I'd probably wait till the 8th hour to explain this to you because it's kind of like giving away the end of the story right at the beginning. But in our condensed time, we're going to just boil anger management down into these two themes. I've got to ask two questions of myself and answer them well. Number one is, why am I angry? I've got to explore what came before my anger, what kind of stress, what kind of frustration led to that. And then number two, I've got to decide, what am I going to do with this anger? What am I going to do with this energy that comes up? So when we're looking at why do I get angry, the reasons for it, if I were to ask what's the reason why I got angry, y'all would probably say, oh, well, it was the hammer, or it was the fact that the door was locked at this building that I thought I was running late for the appointment, whatever, those kind of things. But if we were using general terms, we see that sometimes anger, even though it's an emotion, it can be like the universal emotion for other emotions that we don't know how to communicate. Especially if we don't have a good language for communicating anxiety or depression, it'll probably come out as irritability. We see that a lot with little kids because they can't really express that, and it frustrates them that they can't express it, but they can express their frustration. It comes out looking like anger or irritability. Oftentimes in grief, grief is a rarely spoken language in our culture. It's not always open for communication. It's a language that makes other people uncomfortable. And many times in grief, we don't feel like we have the opportunity or the freedom to express our sadness. And over a time period, we can see people in grief communicating that as anger. Here's a slide here that has several different emotions on there. And when we talk about emotions, there's a full array of different things that we can feel at any particular time. And if we don't have access to a way of expressing those emotions, if we're not allowed to feel those emotions, if we just constantly stuff those down, oftentimes those emotions will come out not the way we initially felt them, but will come out as anger. So oftentimes we'll see someone that's angry and we have to look below the surface. What might be driving this? What other emotions might be there that needs to be explored? Some of the basic reasons why we get angry, when our needs go unmet. Number one need, physical needs. Who is likely to get cranky if you don't get enough sleep? Who's likely to get cranky if you've skipped a meal? Who gets cranky if your socks are wet? Oh, I hate it when I have wet socks. Isn't that the worst? It just feels uncomfortable every step. Even when you're sitting down, it's uncomfortable. So when our physical needs are not being met, if we're hungry, if we're sleepy, if we're uncomfortable, is that something that just teenagers deal with? Yeah, it's your very first day of life you deal with it. When does a baby cry? Yeah, when he's hungry. When he cries when he needs to be asleep. He cries when he's uncomfortable, when that diaper needs changing, right? So it's no different from them. It's no different from our 80-year-olds. And in between, there's a need for the physical things to be taken care of. Another thing that can make us feel angry is relationship needs. We are geared for relationships. In Genesis account, where we see Adam being created, we have 6 days where God says at the end of the day, it was good. He looked over what he created, whether it was the fish in the sea, birds in the air, the land-dwelling animals. He summed up the day's creation with, it was good. And then he created man. Not just man, but man in the image of God, right? It's like, here's the pinnacle of my work. Here's creation, starting with the basics and moving up to the highest form. And at the end, he looked at Adam and said, it is not good. Can anybody else finish the rest of that verse? It is not good that man should be alone. Thank you, Olivia. That's right. We're geared for relationships. And there's so much that goes into making a relationship work and making relationships equitable, where it feels like it's even and well matched. And when we don't feel loved, when we don't feel accepted, when we don't feel valued, we're more likely to respond with anger. Those are some important needs that we have. Another need that we'll take a look at is the convictions that we live by. This is kind of an oddball category of anger, but we see this is really the category that most of our wars come from. Differences in religious perspective. In fact, a lot of the things that take place that kind of infuriate a nation are things that fall in the line of convictions. How does it feel when you see our flag being burned? Yeah, I mean that's a thing that can stamp on our convictions. Or how about if you see a puppy being mistreated? Ooh, yeah, right away. Or an elderly person being mistreated, right? That's a conviction, and when those convictions are violated, we react with anger. That's a category that is probably there for a good reason, because there's a certain part of us that needs to be protectors, that needs to protect those that don't have power. So that's probably a good aspect of anger. When we look at anger as energy, we talk about anger as being the focus, being the target. But anger is really a response to stress. All anger begins as some type of stress. We've talked in some of our other classes about the role of stress, especially in anxiety and in depression. Here's another role where stress takes a role. That we have, anger is the eventual result of unresolved stress. What does that mean? Well, it could mean that we've got more homework than we have hours to do it, right? That's a mismatch of resources. That can cause us stress. From an adult perspective, it's when you have more bills than you have paycheck. That's stress. I'm sure that you can imagine, if not completely relate, but when we have that mismatch of resources, that's stress. I may have skipped a slide, did I? I did. Okay. All right. Or may have jumped around one. Let me see. This is supposed to make sense. Okay. Yeah, so we have that mismatch of resources. So here's a question. How do you show anger? What's the easy way to recognize anger? Well, probably the most popular way of expressing anger is one you wouldn't recognize because you wouldn't really see it. It's called denial. It's basically pushing it down. Because as polite people, as Christian people, we feel like we're not allowed to show anger. So when we get angry, and it may be for valid reasons, when we get angry, we tend to push it down. I mean, maybe I should ask, are there valid reasons to get angry besides kicking a puppy or mistreating an old person? Yeah, there's some valid reasons to get angry. I mean, we can say many times, we can look at a situation and say, I had a right to be angry. But our emphasis tonight is seeing that what's more important than having a right to be angry is having a responsibility with that anger. So when we look at how we show anger, one of the ways that we may show it is by not showing it, by denying it, saying, oh, it doesn't matter. It's okay. Just blow it off. It'll go away. It'll be fine. Well, if it does really matter and we're just pushing it down, eventually we're going to run out of room. And the stuff we push down, it doesn't leak out. It doesn't evaporate. It doesn't go away. We see people, angry adults, that are angry because they started angry as kids because of the way they got treated at home or things that went on. It just flares up and comes out later. Second way that we can show anger is passive aggressive. Does anybody know what passive aggressive means? I know I've got some things listed up there. But if I was being passive aggressive, that means I want to get even with somebody, but I don't want to look like a bad guy. I might want to exact some revenge, but I don't want anything to come back on me where they may retaliate to that. So I may have a deadline. Maybe my boss is really pushing. This needs to be completed. That's really important. It's important to me. It's important to the company. I need to have this done by 3 o'clock. Okay. So at 3 o'clock, I'm sitting with the files on my desk. I think maybe it's time for me to go grab a cup of coffee. Maybe swing by the restroom. Maybe look out the window and then swing these by my boss's desk at 3:09. Yeah, 3:09. That's close enough to 3 and probably just enough after 3 that it'll really irritate. That's being passive aggressive. Or what if I forget? Didn't I ask you to pick up my dry cleaning before the important meeting? Oh, I forgot to pick those up. But in reality, I knew this is really going to irritate them if I forget. So being passive aggressive means I have an out. I have a way of saying or apologizing for what looked pretty innocent, but was really pretty devious. Another very popular form of passive aggressive behavior is sarcasm. Does anybody know what sarcasm is? David knows what sarcasm is, surprisingly. See, that was me being sarcastic. Yeah, that's those left-handed jokes that really kind of are digs. Oh, and if I offend you, then I can say, hey, I'm sorry, David, I was just trying to be funny. But see, I've always got an out, I've got an excuse, so I'm not the bad guy. And we have to be careful about people that are passive-aggressive. Now, the thing that is really easy to spot is open aggression. That's screaming, that's hollering, that's hitting, that's fighting, that's breaking things. That gets our attention real quick. That makes a lot of sense. What is confusing is when we see somebody blowing up over something really small. Have y'all seen that happen before? The least little thing and someone blows up. What that probably means is they've already spent some time stuffing stuff. They sent some until it started building up some emotional pressure. Because anger is energy. And if you're holding it inward, it's got to work against you. So they thought, okay, I've got this building up in me. I'll let some of it out. I'll have some passive aggressive behavior and kind of leak some of this pressure out. And then, boom, something happens and they explode. That's because it all caught up with them. And when we look at people that are depressed, that's usually the style they go to, is denial, passive aggressive, and then blow up, or not blow up at all. And in fact, if we take a look at anger that's turned inward, that would be another way that we could classify depression, pointing it towards ourselves. So those are three negative ways of expressing anger. The positive ways of expressing anger, number one, being assertive. You know, there are going to be things in life that upset us, that aren't going the way they should go, that maybe on purpose or on accident offend us. It's important for us to deal with them directly, to deal with them quickly, to go in a manner that's respectful to the other party and settle these things. That's being assertive. That may be just as simple as clarification. That might be me saying, Andrew, you know, you said something earlier about the length of my hair. Could you clarify what you meant by that? Okay, all right, good, good, because initially I initially felt offended, but I thought I'd clarify, so wanted to make sure that we could talk that over so I know where we're at. So that's being assertive. That may be dealing with something that's hard to deal with. Now, there are some of us, and I'm one of them, that is conflict avoidant. That means I don't look for a fight. In fact, I am really good at running from fights. I was much more prefer the track and field events than I would the head-to-head combat events. So in my adulthood, that's been a struggle for me to be assertive, to deal directly with issues as they come up. But it is something that if we go into it respectfully, that can be accomplished and good can come from it. The other thing to talk about is dropping it. Now, dropping it can look a whole lot like denial, and that's not what I'm saying, that you just drop it. Drop it is actually after you've done your homework. You've tried to be assertive, you tried to address a problem, you put some effort and energy into that problem, but you realize there's really not a way to solve this problem. So it's best for me to drop it. I could focus on the United States laws concerning income tax, and I could get really angry. But I realize I'm not going to change the laws about income tax. They're there for a reason. The reason doesn't always benefit me. I can convince myself at some point in the future that it may. And let's hope that Social Security will be around long enough that it does benefit me. But in the meantime, does it do me any good to be angry at the United States government for the income tax that we have? No. I mean, that's a lot of energy to waste. It would be much better for me to just drop it. Let that go. It's been resolved, knowing that it can't be resolved. So I've done my homework. I've done what I can. Next election term, I can vote for somebody else and feel like I'm being passive aggressive in doing it. But anyway, at least I'm dropping it. I'm moving away from it. Some of the negative effects that comes with anger, and this is probably the one that impacts my work the most, is anger destroys relationships. Even a couple that has a great amount of love for each other and a great level of commitment for each other and will put up with anger and harsh anger will eventually wear out. And that family member will say, and I've had men sit in my office and say, I don't get it. I mean, she knew who I was when she married me. Why is she surprised I haven't changed? Well, she was able to, she had the resources, the whatever that is, the endurance back then to put up with it. And eventually the anger just wore that out, where there's nothing left. I don't have that compassion for his anger anymore, so I'm done. So we see that anger destroys relationships. It also interferes with our work and school performance. Those of you that have been in competitive sports, having someone get inside your head, if you can get someone angry, then you're going to affect how they perform, right? They're not going to be as deliberate or as skillful as they should be. Also, if we're angry, we're not going to do well in things that require the solving part of our brain. if we're looking at the brain, if we're looking across the species of God's creation, we'll start at the bottom. Well, not the bottom. We'll start with reptiles. We've got the brain stem. Now, all of us from reptiles up have a brain stem. It's important for things like breathing, blinking, heartbeats, the things that we don't have to think about that just naturally occur. This is our survival part of the brain. Inside as part of the brain stem, there's something about the size of a walnut called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the region where trauma is stored in memories. It's also geared towards survival. So if you ever touched a hot stove when you were a kid, then somewhere in that amygdala, there is a memory that tells you red hot stoves are painful. Don't touch red hot stoves. All right? Good. An alligator, a reptile, everything in their world has to go through 3 filters. Do I eat it? Do I run from it? Do I ignore it? That's in the alligator's world. That's how he views everything in life. Now, as we move up the food chain, we see in mammals the limbic system, the parasympathetic systems of the brain. This is where our emotions are. You will never see a sea turtle cuddling her young. You know, they just lay their eggs, kick sand over them, run off to the ocean. But a bear will take care of her cub. A lion will take care of her cub. Human beings take care of their cubs, right? We have those emotions, those maternal instincts. And then the human being has a cerebral cortex, which makes up about 60% of our brain. That's where math, logic, language is stored. That's where our higher level of problem solving take place. So when we get angry and we lash out, guess which parts of the brain we're not using as human beings? The 60% we're not using. And depending on how we lash out, if we say, my anger was automatic, it was instant, I didn't think about anything, I just reacted. That would be like the alligator, right? The brain stem, which is about 15% of our brain. Or if we reacted simply out of emotions, the limbic system, that's about 25% of our brain. So when we act in anger, there's a large portion of our brain we're not using. So part of anger management is engaging the other 60% of our brain to deal with things. So some tools that are very helpful for us. Back to negative effects of anger. Last 2. Anger can make bad situations worse, right? Someone may have had an anger outburst and started yelling. In response, the other person in the room got louder. And the rule is kind of like whoever's loudest is rightest. And so when one reacts with this volume, the other reacts with this volume until they run out of volume and then start throwing in these words, and they countered with these words, and the next thing you know, you're hearing you're fat, and the other one's saying you're just like your mother, and boom, there they are. And so when someone is angry, how much of their brain is using? Well, certainly not the 60%. So they're only using about 40% of their brain. There's a theory that says that someone in a rage has just dropped their IQ by 40 points. Do we reason with someone that has impaired their IQ by that amount? No. It would be best just to calm them down. If we can calm them down, then we can get access to the other 60% of their brain, hopefully work from there. So they make bad situations worse, and they often, anger often leads to aggression or violence. Let's put some tools in our toolbox and have some things that might be helpful for us. One of the things that can best help us in anger management is having a healthy self-dialogue, having that inner coach that gives us good advice. Something that might sound something like, someday I'll laugh at all of this, or things could be worse. Calm down. Take things one day at a time, or I've handled bigger challenges than this one, but doesn't kill me. right? So some positive thoughts that we can tell ourselves. These are calming thoughts. Where do we think we store those calming thoughts at? In the 60% of the brain, the cerebral cortex. So we need to make sure that part of the brain is engaged. It can talk to the other 40% and calm it down. Another tool is perspective. Our first class we talked about perspective, how we view things. Has this situation or something like this happened to me before? What did I learn from it the last time? What's the worst possible outcome that could take place? And is that outcome very likely to take place? What action can I take to solve this? Not to react to it, but to solve it. And then finally, 5 years from now, will I even remember this? Will it even be a big deal? Now that's a tough one to do, that last one, because of your age and your experience level. The biggest thing you're dealing with today is probably the biggest thing you've ever dealt with in your life. And so you're always pushing the limits with what you can deal with, and experience helps push those limits. But just knowing, hearing from those that are older, that you're going to survive these years and you're going to be able to get through these times can be helpful to know that there are things that are better in the future. And then another tool, a tool that hopefully you will like, is the tool of recreation. The word itself means to recreate yourself. Find something that gives you energy. Anger can be energy, and if you stuff it, it becomes negative energy. We can find positive ways of releasing that energy. I heard a story of a guy that talked about bowling, and he imagined all the pins having his boss's face on it. And so as he would roll that bowling ball, he felt that the freedom of being able to smash all those. One guy talked about using a stapler at work, that he could take out his frustrations on a stapler. One lady told me about hoeing in her garden was a way that she could release her anger and her energy in a positive way, in a way that helped recreate her. Now, some of us have hobbies that we really enjoy, like video games. However, there's a pretty broad range of video games. Some of those can be relaxing, that we just go through. Some of them can be pretty intense. Some of them can be frustrating that we haven't mastered yet. If that choice frustrates you, don't make that your go-to for anger management recreation. Golf fits in that category. I like the definition of golf. It's a long walk full of frustration. That's exactly what it is for me. And so if I wanted to have stress relief, I would not go out on the golf course. That's just only going to make me more angry. I ran across this drawing in a book for helping children deal with anger, and I've given it to many different adults over the years, but it's just a very visual graphic that when you get angry, that you need to cool down. I need to cool down my body, all right? You can probably feel tension in your body. For me, the telltale sign is my ears feel hot. For some people, it might be a clenched jaw. For others, it might be clenched fist. It might just feeling nervous, like I gotta go, I gotta run. We can tell we've got tension in our body. That tension is good, that's there to communicate. We need to do something, we need to act. If we start feeling that tension, we need to have some cool down thoughts, right? Like those ones that we had from the philosopher Nietzsche, what doesn't kill me only makes me stronger. Just calm down, take 2 minutes, count to 10, go for a walk. Whatever those cool down thoughts are, those cool down actions for the body, and then try to get into problem solving, right? Very helpful if we take that approach. A couple of scriptures I wanted to finish with before our question and answer section. This has to do with people that have tempers. Hopefully you can read this up here from Proverbs chapter 22. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. Okay, it's telling us about angry people. Avoid those angry people. So as a second party, we can look and say, I need to be discerning about my friends. We can also look at it and say, what if I am that angry person? Then what should I expect from people around me? Well, if they're wise, if they follow the Proverbs, they're going to keep distance from you. They're not going to want to be your friends if you're an angry person. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 22. An angry person stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered person commits many sins. Anybody would disagree with that? We say that's probably a whole lot easier to be sinful if we're angry. Okay? All right. How we respond to people that are angry. This is good because we can't always choose the emotions and the feelings of others. So, Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. When we were talking about whoever's loudest is rightest, we call that escalation. Anybody know what that automatic stair is called at the mall? An escalator, yes. It takes you from one floor to the next, right? Escalating is like that. It takes us to the next level. And so we can do things to make it worse by reacting, by jumping in with the same type behavior. Anger bringing about more anger will escalate the situation. We can look at one thing that helps the situation is doing just the opposite, being able to de-escalate the situation. And Proverbs tells us one way that we can de-escalate the situation is to provide a gentle answer. All right? Proverbs 15:18, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. So we see very different in the two traits of the individuals being described here. The hot-tempered person, conflict, the calm and patient person can calm that conflict. Proverbs 14:29, whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. Folly is a word that gets used a lot in the Proverbs. It gets used about as much as the word wisdom. And it's the opposite of wisdom, things that are unwise, things that are foolish. So we see that whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays foolishness. And whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly or foolishness. So we kind of get a sense of what these angry people look like. And then finally, an encouragement from James, James chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Okay, one more time. You should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Good, very good. I appreciate that. All right. Alan, this is my short session, so I'm ready for questions and answers.
All right. Take the next 30 seconds and turn to the person next to you. Tell them one thing that you learned from Russell's talk. And go.
Everything can be good. Where did John go?
That might make sense.
All right. Let's bring it back in. Let's finish up our session with some questions and answers. So the main thing that I guess I learned, I want to say what I learned real quick. The main thing I learned about was that anger can, when you push down anger, that can be something unhealthy if it falls in the denial category. So if it's something that you just don't want to talk about it, and you don't want to deal with it at all, that can be an unhealthy thing. So it doesn't mean that you have to, lash out, but there are healthy ways of dealing with that anger, healthier ways than just not doing anything about it or just ignoring it. That can fall in the denial category. Did I learn a good thing?
That is good. And also I think that patience has a role there. It may be that when you want to deal with something assertively, you may want to get some advice. You might want to seek out some wisdom on how best to deal with it. And so, I don't know that any quick answer is going to be a great answer.
Right.
And so being deliberate and seeking out wisdom is certainly a good way to be part of dealing with something that makes you angry.
When I was younger, and this is my question to Russell, when my concept of anger was this sinful emotion. Anger is very much associated with sin in my mind. And as I've gotten older, I've come to have a better theology about anger. Do you guys know what theology means? It means a study of God, the study of God. So a better theology of anger is that we have emotions, but we are also made in God's image. And these emotions, we actually have recorded in the Bible that God had these emotions as well. We just talked about an example of Jesus having this emotion. Well, Jesus lived a sinless life. So having anger doesn't necessarily mean that you have committed sin. So that was important for me as I started to learn these things. And it's important that you guys know that too. There is a good side of anger and a bad side of anger. There can definitely be sin that's attached to anger if we use it in a negative way, just like Russell talked about. Do you feel like anger, do you feel like there's any emotions that we experience, Russell, that don't fall into that category of we were made in God's image and that's an emotion that God has as well?
I think there's some things that we're warned not to, some qualities that God has that we're warned not to have. We find out that God's a jealous God. God is a wrathful God. And even though we're called to be like God in many ways, not in all ways, because we're always going to be limited in our perspective. We can't bring down wrath because we don't always have the full story. To be jealous means to be possessive. And the reality is nothing belongs to us. Everything belongs to God. He's the only one that has the right to be jealous. And back to we may have a right to be angry, but we have a responsibility with it. We see that in how God deals with his people. He obviously has the most definite right to be angry when he's angry. He also has a responsibility with that anger. And many times he was angry with his people that were deliberately disobedient time after time after time. And even though justice may have cried out for the removal of these people, he always made sure there was a remnant that would fulfill this lineage that he had promised a Savior to. And so God is always right in his anger, and he's always just in his anger. And there are times that we're limited so that we cannot be some of those qualities that God is.
I want to make sure we get to some of our questions from the crowd, but we did have one that was sent in beforehand that I really want to get to. Someone had asked if we don't experience anger, or we feel like we don't struggle with anger as much as someone else that we know in our family or friend, are there things that we can do to help them manage that anger in a healthy way?
Well, what I hope I'm hearing is, how can I be a good model for anger management, or how can I encourage someone to do better with their anger? That's certainly, being that calming voice. We talked about how rage can lower a person's ability to be rational. And so our first response to someone who's raging is to calm them down. If that means remove them from the situation, remove them from the situation. If it means giving some calming words, that person may not have that inner dialogue that we're working to obtain. So we may have to be that inner dialogue to them. Calm down, this isn't that bad, take a few minutes, let's take a walk, let's think about this, and be a helper that way. Now, what I wouldn't expect to hear this from this crowd, but oftentimes I hear from people that are in relationships, long-term relationships, where one of the partners, usually the wife, is looking for a way to carry the responsibility of anger that her husband has. How can I help him with his anger problems? As if, how can I try more, do more, be more responsible? And obviously, if anger is a problem in their marriage, then both people need to be working on that problem. and she can't do the work for him. She can't want anger management more than he wants anger management.
And this would be true in a friendship as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are some, well, like Proverbs was directing us towards, is we've got to be careful about those relationships because they can affect how we eventually react. And I've had people say, I'm not an angry person. I don't know why I'm at this point that now I'm the one that's using the same language. I'm the one that's throwing the same fits. I have become the parts of my spouse that I hate the most. And so, and I get nervous in premarital counseling when I hear people use the term potential. Because what that tells me is, when they say, well, my future mate has a lot of potential. Well, that tells me they're a long ways from where they really need to be. And Grandpa Crook used to say, men marry women hoping they'll never change, and women marry men hoping they can change them. And so if you don't like who that spouse is, that choice, as they are, if you don't accept what they bring to the table in that instant, then you probably need to seek out a little bit of wisdom on how to deal with that relationship. That may have been too exciting.
It's okay, it's all right. So let's take some questions now from the crowd. We have parents in the back and students. Anyone who wants to ask a question, this is your opportunity to ask a question and direct it towards Russell on anger.
You can ask anything, I won't get mad. Yes, back row.
So sometimes you may act out in anger and not know what the source of the anger is.
Okay, yes.
And so if you recognize that you're easily being irritated or things like that, but you don't know what the cause is, how would you deal with that?
It's a whole lot about self-awareness, kind of like that chart that we were looking at, going through the phases. What exactly am I feeling? If I'm feeling this versus that, then why? I remember in my graduate work, there was one teacher that taught 2 essential classes that I was going to have to take, and there was no other options. I had to take, Dr. Pender was her name. I had to take these 2 classes from Dr. Pender. There's no way to get around it. And she had a reputation for hard tests. They called them Pender's mind benders. But they didn't really, that kind of sounded bad, but okay, I got to take her class. So I'm in her class, and I've never met her before or seen her, and she walks in, and she starts talking, and automatically I feel this tension inside me. I don't like this person. I've never met her. She's not saying anything offensive. She's got this air about her and some certain mannerisms that I think, this is really grating on me. And I thought, oh man, this is going to be a long semester. And next semester is going to be long too, because I'm going to have to take her again for this other class. I thought, oh, what am I going to do? And I sat there and I thought, why am I getting so irritated? Why do I feel so defensive towards everything she says? And it dawned on me that she reminded me of someone from my past, someone that I had a very poor relationship with that was very, believe it or not, there's people that I don't get along with. And she reminded me very much of one of those people I didn't get along with. And once I realized, hey, that's cool, she's not who, she reminds me of, all the anger went away, all that tension and irritability went away. So it's really about investigating the emotion that's driving it. Sometimes it might be we have to open up the calendar, see what day we're on, see if there's an important grief day that might be attached to that person, that particular day. And maybe it's a sadness, a grief that's driving irritability that could be fueling that emotion. Because, anger is the universal emotion. If you can't express those others, like grief, it could come out as anger. So, I hope that answers your question.
Any others? Any from the students? Everyone's got a solid beat on anger. All right, well, let's thank Mr. Russell for his time tonight. Next week, we will be talking about the importance of self-esteem. Can you give us just maybe a 20-second preview? What sort of issues do you think we'll be hitting on when we talk about self-esteem?
Yeah, we're going to talk a whole lot about yardsticks.
Hey!
Yardsticks, right? That's how we measure things.
Uh-huh.
And the way we measure our esteem can have an effect on what we put on our yardstick has a lot to do with our self-esteem. It could be the type of car we drive, it could be the size paycheck we have, it could be wearing the right brand of clothes, whatever. And we've got to take a look and say, is that yardstick a valid way of measuring worth and value? And the other thing we're going to look at is, why don't we call it self-esteem when others have so much to do with it? Okay? All right.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good night.